What's going on, Bears fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bears Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bears related. I'm one of the hosts here, Haize. I typically host the Chicago Bears Central daily episodes, holding it down for my co-hosts C-Dub and Bobby. And on today's episode, we'll go over my three biggest concerns heading into the Bears season. We'll also go over Bears who I expect to shine and have the most to earn coming out of training camp. And then lastly, I'll be asking, are the Bears taking the right approach to a rebuild? We'll get into all that and more on today's Chicago Bears Central.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bears Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bears news and content.
All right, Bears fans. So what's going on? First off, I hope everyone's having a great weekend. You can be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me. I should say had a great weekend because this is definitely past tense. Today's Monday. But with that being said, I wanted to go over, I already named in the last video, the last Chicago Bears Daily, the biggest reasons to be positive for the Chicago Bears upcoming season in 2022-23. I'm going to get into my personal biggest concerns and things that I think that the Bears can and will prove to us over the course of this 2022-23 season. And the first one is the offensive line. That's one of the biggest question marks that we have for the Chicago Bears right now, in my opinion, is the Bears offensive line. This offensive line last season gave up 58 sacks in 17 games. That's the in one of the worst games. Justin Fields was sacked 9 times in just one game. So hopefully we see a solid improvement in that Chicago Bears offensive line in this season, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it's definitely one of my biggest concerns coming into the season. Can the Bears protect Justin Fields enough to keep him upright, to keep him out of pressure so that he can continue to develop as the quarterback we all think and want to see Justin Fields develop into? Lots been made about Justin Fields and what this season means to him, but listen, without the improvement from the offensive line, without them proving what they can or can't do, it's going to be a lot of pressure for Justin Fields in this upcoming season. So that is definitely one of my biggest concerns heading into this upcoming season. The next one, how do the Bears combat the loss of Khalil Mack and maybe Robert Quinn in that as well, as we look into what's going on with their defense? How can they overcome that? Who steps up? Usually one of the team's biggest moves are usually ones that improve the team. I think the Bears' biggest loss by far is Khalil Mack. Yes, questions about his health, all things like that. He did miss 10 games last season, so I definitely understand while some people may not view that as big of a deal as what it is. But keep in mind, the Bears were able to kind of overcome Khalil Mack being out last season because of the season that Robert Quinn had. As right now, we don't know if Robert Quinn's even going to report to camp. That's going to do a lot to maybe calm down some of these concerns I have with that. But I'd be lying again if I didn't say that how the Bears defense overcomes the loss of Khalil Mack isn't one of the biggest question marks to me heading into this season. Now, Travis Gibson, Al-Qualidin, Muhammad, as they try to fill in those shoes that they may be able to do to a degree, but it still is one of my biggest questions heading into the season for the Chicago Bears. Now, the last one is just that, the lack of depth on defense. When you look at losing Akeem Hicks and Khalil Mack in the same offseason, what does that mean for the Bears pass rush? And maybe that's a better way to word this last concern, is what is the Bears pass rush going to really look like? There aren't any true replacements for either one of those players. Now we can hope to overcome it by a better defense overall, better defensive scheme, some players stepping up and performing in ways that we can't and don't maybe expect. But that pass rush that the Chicago Bears will need in a lot of ways and can help benefit even that secondary, that is one of the biggest question marks, at least for me, heading into this next season. So those are my biggest question marks for the Chicago Bears. I know this is a Bears channel. I am very positive and I think very highly of this team, and I'm looking forward to this team. But I would be remiss in not being honest if we didn't talk about some of the bigger question marks for the Chicago Bears team heading into the next season. Now, on the flip side of that, let's talk about some of the players with the most to prove going into training camp. Who's going to maybe gain something and up their stock in training camp? The first one on this is the tackle Braxton Jones. A lot's been talked about with him. A lot's talked about that offensive line. I said just named the offensive line as one of my biggest question marks. I think that was the first one that I named, was it not? But what does Braxton Jones do for that offensive line? Is he going to be the starter? I don't necessarily think that's any question that he's going to be the starter. But right now, with him, with Cody Whitehair, Lucas Patrick, and locks at the left guard and center, so much is up in air for that Chicago Bears offensive line. And Braxton Jones has a huge chance to be that starting left tackle and earn that job. And I think if he comes out of that, doing that, keep in mind, Braxton Jones is a former highly coveted pick, right? It's not like he's coming into anything that it's not like he didn't have any expectations. We need to see him step up. We absolutely need to see that. And for that matter, the second round pick of last year, Tevin Jenkins as well. We need to see these players step up. One, if not both of them, have very big training camps where they come out of that clear starters on this offensive line. Next up, Thomas Graham Jr. Now, we've talked a lot about the Bears secondary, the young secondary, drafting Kyler Gordon, what that means for him starting opposite of Jalen Johnson. But the nickel cornerback, that's going to be up for Thomas Graham Jr. to show and prove that he deserves. The Bears had one of the worst secondaries in the league last season. So that secondary, even though we have players coming in and rookies coming in that we expect to be able to earn and play very well in those starting positions, Thomas Graham Jr. coming into training camp, having a great training camp, and coming out of that, showing that he's ready to go, it can change a lot for this Bears secondary. And I think and I hope that he's able to step up. And even though after spending most of his rookie season on the practice squad, coming in and being able to play very well for the Chicago Bulls. He had 7 tackles and 3 pass breakups in his just NFL debut last season. Hopefully we see him come in with a better track record and just play better overall. And then one of the biggest players that have the most to gain, now I wouldn't necessarily say this is just training camp, but in the season, we already know Justin Fields. Everything going on with the Chicago Bears, any conversation that comes up with the Chicago Bears in this offseason, and probably for the most part of the 2022-23 season, is all going to be built around the progression of Justin Fields. How does he play? How does he progress? Does he show and prove to be that franchise quarterback that so many Bears fans hope that we have and that we need in Justin Fields to grow into? We need that. We deserve it. And Justin Fields is just as hungry to get that and prove it to this Bears fan base and to the city of Chicago as well. But he's definitely a player that has a lot to prove coming into training camp and going into the season as well. All eyes are going to be on Justin Fields all season long. No matter what else happens in the secondary, what happens with the rookies, what happens with Velus Jones Jr. and the wide receiver core, Darnell Mooney, whatever happens with all of those. David Montgomery, does he get a contract extension? The biggest question and the biggest thing that everybody's looking out for is how Justin Fields improved from this summer to the start of the season. That's it. The chemistry with him and Darnell Mooney is going to be great for him in this season. But again, the progression of Justin Fields is probably the most important thing heading into, and I don't want to overstate it. We all know what it means. So let's go ahead and move on. The next one up on a Bear that has a lot to prove and can come out of training camp with a lot is Khalil Herbert. I said it before. David Montgomery, some people expect him to be back. Some people don't expect him to be back in a league where running backs come a dime a dozen now, it seems like nowadays. Khalil Herbert has the potential of playing well and being part of that run team. Again, him and Blasingame as well. I do think that this team is going to run, and we're going to run heavy. That is what Luke Getsy's offensive scheme is going to be. And because of that, we're going to see a lot of David Montgomery. We're going to see a lot of second-year back Khalil Herbert. We're going to see probably a lot of Blasingame. We're going to see a lot of things like that. If Khalil Herbert has a great season, it really can change to where, signing David Montgomery may not even be needed. Right now, I do think, and I do want to see David Montgomery stay with the Chicago Bears. I've been very vocal on that as well. But Khalil Herbert, in the season that he could possibly have, and the fact that they can form one of the better running tandems in the NFL, I definitely believe that. I think that David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert can be one of the best 1-2 punches at the running back in the whole NFL. But it's up to them to prove it. And a big part of that is Khalil Herbert. We pretty much know what David Montgomery is going to be able to bring being fully healthy, but Khalil Herbert has to prove that last season and that success was not a flash in the pan and something that we can bet on to build around on the Chicago Bulls running team. Now, again, another player, last 2 players that I'm going to talk about, they have the most to prove. I think Velus Jones Jr., when you hear about what he's talked about, when you talk about the doubt around his age, but him and his speed and what he can bring with this team and the fact that he's hungry. I know N'Keal Harry, we just got him, and he's a big target possibly as well. But I look at what Velus Jones Jr. can turn into and develop even in year 1, that he does have a lot to prove in training camp and in the season. I know we are expecting Byron Pringle to be the clear wide receiver number 2, but I have said it on this show and on this podcast. I think before the end of the season, Velus Jones Jr. is going to be the clear wide receiver 2 on this team. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to go out and get a better wide receiver in the offseason next season and kind of more so take over that spot. But I think Velus Jones has a lot to prove in training camp in this preseason heading into the regular season. Now, the last player on this list may be an unexpected one. I thought about going Trevis Gibson here on that defensive end because we know what it means, especially with the departure of a Khalil Mack, him being that edge rusher. And I do think that Trevis Gibson has a lot to prove too. Don't get me wrong. Him coming in, us transitioning to a 4-3 defense, all of that, Gibson is going to be in a natural position for himself. And I think it's going to benefit him in that battle with Al-Quadin Muhammad as well. And I think that Trevis Gibson, I think that he's going to come out on top in that battle. But a bigger one than that is Khyiris Tonga. Now, this is a big guy, big body, not too quick, not too strong, but the defensive line has always been a strength of the Chicago Bears when the defense is good. When you look at the departure of Eddie Hicks, Eddie Goldman, all that, it really does leave Khyiris Tonga as being the one that can really prove a lot. Yes, we have Justin Jones in as the 3 tech, and he's going to do very good in that. But right now, to put in that nose tackle spot, I do think Khyiris Tonga is going to be that, and I think he's going to earn that spot and hopefully play very well in that. If he's not, Mike Pennell is right there ready to go to compete with Khyiris Tonga if he does not earn that starting spot. And because of that, I do think that this training camp is going to be a big one and a major one for Khyiris Tonga as he looks to prove that he should have that starting position. Like I said, Mike Pennell is going to be ready to go if Khyiris Tonga cannot prove it. But when you look at Khyiris Tonga, his physicals, what he offers, a strong training camp for Khyiris Tonga can make him, in his second year, that clear starter at that position. And we'll see what we have in him. Do the Bears eventually need to upgrade from him? It all remains to be seen. But I think Khyiris Tonga needs to have a big training camp for the Chicago Bears so we can see what we really have in him and if he's a piece that's going to be on this team as far as building around for the future. Let me know some of the players that you're looking at to have a big training camp to earn, maybe up their standing, maybe solidify their starting spot. Let me know what you guys think of all that down below. Now, before we go, I'm a Madden player, as most people are. The Madden ratings, I should say, for the Bears wide receiver core came out today, so we're going to talk about them before we go. So Darnell Mooney comes in at a 79 overall. I think that's a bit low for the season that Darnell Mooney had. Considering everything that went into that season, I fully expected Darnell Mooney to be around an 80 to 82, maybe as high as an 85. Not the 85, but probably 82 range. Him coming in the 70s, not even being in the 80s, I think is a bit of a slap in the face, but Darnell Mooney's going to prove it. Next up, we had Byron Pringle at number 75. 75. A lot of question marks around him. This is a prove year for him. Pettis at 74, Sharp with 70, David Moore at 69, and Velus Jones Jr. at 69 as well. We also got St. Brown coming in as a 68 overall. To round that out, Newsome as a 67, Webster as a 67, and Coulter as a 66. Now, N'Keal Harry's not on here. When they were preparing these rankings, they probably didn't expect him to be on the Chicago Bears. But that is this. The doubt for the Chicago Bears team even extends to the virtual realm when it comes to Madden. I'm going to be playing Madden. I'm definitely going to be running my franchise with the Chicago Bears. That's always what I do. But let me know what you guys think about those ratings. Do you think that Darnell Mooney was rated too low, like I did? Do you expect him to be rated higher? Did you expect maybe David Moore, St. Brown, or Velus Jones to be rated a little bit higher than being in the high 60s as well? Let me know what you guys think about all that down below also. But that is it for today's episode of Chicago Bears Central, the daily version of the podcast. If you want to follow the show, make sure you do so at Chi Bears Central on Twitter and TikTok that we're on now. You can also send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, chicagobearcentral@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text and a voicemail, the number to do so is 773-270-2799. Thank you for tuning in to Chicago Bears Central and making this platform what it is as we continue to build it out. You guys already know how I like to end it. Make sure you guys bear down, and I'll see you lovely and beautiful people tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.